So welcome everyone to the NAIOP virtual breakfast this morning. My name is Dave Strickland. I'm the president of NAIOP Southern Nevada. You know, a week or so ago, or a couple weeks ago, we went to the NAIOP chapter leaders legislative retreat. It was a virtual event, and we came home with some awards, and I just want to congratulate all of you. So the first award it was a special event award, and it was the bus tour. So I want to thank Sean Zaire and Jake Higgins and Jen Levine and all those that helped put that on. It was a great event last year. The next one was an Outstanding Leadership Award. Julie Cleaver, our past president, won that. She took us through some tumultuous times during COVID. So we appreciate all of her leadership and her hard work last year. This is a national award, and so we definitely applaud her. And then finally, we received the Chapter of the Year Award for large chapters. That too is a national award, and we just want to thank all those volunteers and all the committees that helped us achieve that. It's a great honor, and we should applaud ourselves as well as everyone in the chapter. At this time, we'd like to thank our President's Circle sponsors who are so instrumental in the success of the NAIOP chapter. Cox Business, they've been one of our sponsors for 18 years. They're a platinum sponsor. We'd also like to thank our gold sponsors, DC Building Group, Kimberly Horn and Associates, Majestic Realty, Panattoni Development Company, Prologis, Southern Nevada Water Authority, the Howard Hughes Corporation, and Thomas and Mack Development Group. We'd also like to recognize each of our remaining President's Circle sponsors and their various levels. We'd like to thank also our 2021 breakfast meeting sponsors. Affordable Concepts, you can see them on your screen. Carpenter Sellers, Delgado Architects, Compass Development, Cox Business, Dermody Properties, Helix Electric, KNIT, Martin Harris Construction, NV Energy, and SR Construction. And a special thanks to today's sponsor, Helix Electric. They've been a supporter and a sponsor of NAIOP since 1999. So I'm pleased to introduce Nathan Cartwright. He's the Director of Business Development for Helix Electric. Nathan joined NAIOP back in 2017. Las Vegas has been his home for nearly 20 years, and with his wife and his 4 great kids. Welcome, Nathan, and thank you for your support.
Good morning. Thank you. It's our pleasure. A little bit about Helix Electric of Nevada. Our president, Victor Fuchs, brought Helix to the Valley back when Michael Jordan was with the Bulls and Coolio was on the top of the charts. This was the mid-90s for all of you young real estate agents out there. Since then, Helix has grown to become the largest non-union electrical contractor in the state. We've been fortunate to work with many of you on the structures that shape this valley, the Smith Center, IKEA, the Container Park, and just about every multifamily project built in the last 25 years. We recently completed Meow Wolf at Area 15 with Martin Harris, which I believe is open today. You should all go check that out. We're currently under construction at the 215 curve on the awesome Uncommons project with Burke Construction. But we don't just do big projects. We have a service department that will install your ceiling fan or replace a breaker, including 24/7 emergency response time within an hour of your call. We also have a large, fully staffed engineering department. So if you have projects with immediate needs, anything you need at all, we're here for you. But enough about us. We appreciate the opportunity to support NAIOP and our industry this morning. I'm personally excited to hear about hear from the panel about the future of our land, because everything that I've heard is that we're pretty much out of land. So that'll be exciting. I would just ask, as you all acquire this land and secure our future, as you build your beautiful buildings, please continue to consider Helix Electric for all of your electrical contracting needs. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Nathan. We sure appreciate your sponsorship. We're also very excited to welcome our new members that have joined in the last month. If you know any of these folks, please reach out and welcome them to NAIOP. If you're not a NAIOP member, I hope you'll consider joining. We have 560 members, and during these uncertain times, we continue to connect with each other through committee meetings and principal roundtables. We try to make sure and provide our members relevant and timely information through our breakfasts and our education programs to help our members navigate through the pandemic. This is the number and the website. If there's interest, feel free to reach out to us. And now I'll turn the time over to Katrina Bruce for a few committee announcements.
Thank you, David. I'm multitasking here, folks. All right, the social subcommittee has been busy planning our first members-only event, a virtual wine tasting on Thursday, March 4th at 5:30 p.m. The registration deadline is this coming Monday, so be sure to register so you don't miss out on the March wine madness. Join Team NAIOP at the Make-A-Wish Walk for Wishes. The walk is virtual this year and will be held in April. Help us reach our $5,000 goal again this year. Watch for the email with online registration information. The 24th Annual Spotlight Awards will be presented virtually on Thursday, March 25th at 4 p.m. Be sure to join us, take photos of your watch parties, and tag us on social media using hashtag NAIOP 2021. Hot or not, we still NAIOP. Members, we encourage you to get involved and join a committee. Check out our website for committee details or contact Jonna at our office. Remember to join our members-only Facebook group. This is a great place to get connected and stay informed. Please post about what's happening in your world. And finally, we'd love for everyone to engage in social media this morning. Get creative with your posts like Matthew Weinberger, our Communications Committee Chair, did last month. Be sure to tag NAIOP SNV in all your posts. I'll turn the time back over to you now, David.
Thank you, Katrina. So let's get on with today's program. Today's topic is very important to NAIOP Southern Nevada. A reminder to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the program. Questions will be asked at the end of the program. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Michael Brown. He is the Executive Director of the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, and he was appointed by Governor Sisolak in 2019. He was formerly the head of Barrett Gold North America, and he lives in Anthem. So we'd like to welcome, thank you, Michael, for being with us today.
Oh, good day. It's great to be here. I'm in Carson City today. I want to thank you for inviting me and thank my friend Dan Tutland for inviting me a few weeks ago to do this when we spoke about this important issue. I also, on behalf of Governor Sisolak, want to thank your industry for all that you've done in these challenging months. All of you will remember the night the governor had to stand and close the Las Vegas Strip and close the school system. But the next day we had to have a meeting where we discussed what do we do with the rest of the economy. And in the course of that meeting, we realized that manufacturing, mining, and construction, A, had a culture of safety, and B, had deep supply chains for needed PPE and other protective equipment. And so we as a state did not have to take actions to shutter those industries, unlike some of my counterparts around the United States that had to temporarily shut those industries during the effort to flatten the curve in April and May. And so I appreciate all that you all have done. And I know that many of you scrambled to deal with all of this, and it did not go unnoticed, and we're most appreciative. We're now in a period where the—
Hey, Michael, real quick,
Yes.
what I'll do, let me introduce the rest of the speakers, and then I'll let you finish and we'll just roll on. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you. So Marci Henson is the director of the Clark County Department of Environment and Sustainability, where she directs Clark County's vision for the sustainable community that equitably improves the quality of life, supports economic security, and protects the environment. Her portfolio includes overseeing the county's regional air quality programs, administering the Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, and leading regional sustainability and climate action initiative. Margie graduated from Oregon State University with a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources, specializing in water utilization and conservation. So we welcome you, Marci. Our next speaker is Rosemary Vassiliadis. We appreciate you being here. She's the Director of Aviation for Clark County, Nevada, having been appointed to the lead in the department in 2013. In addition to directing all operations to McCarran, she oversees 4 general aviation airports in Southern Nevada, manages a staff of nearly 1,500 employees, and directs in an airport system that directly employs more than 17,000 people. Rosemary has been married for 36 years, having raised 2 successful children, and she also is a fanatic supporter of the Chicago Cubs. How's that?
Thank you, David.
Hey, no worries. I'll get my video on here in just a second. John, will you go ahead and turn my video on real quick? There we go. Thank you so much. Well, what a day so far. This is great. Again, we appreciate all of you guys and your willingness to share the morning with us, and also to help us talk about this really important topic. So one of the reasons why we're doing this, I was in an association meeting and someone asked me, hey, what's going on? Why is NAIOP doing the land study? What's this land bill that everyone's talking about? And then I realized that there's not a lot of people that kind of know what's going on in the inner workings of this, because this is really a once in a decade or maybe once every 20 years that these types of things come around. And so I thought, you know what? We talked in our programs committee and we said this would be a very good program to at least inform people with what's going on with the lands bill. And so to start this off, Rosemary, I want to I'll later draw some parallels with McCarran, but I thought it would be helpful for you to just talk to us, one, about McCarran Airport and just those types of things, so we can slowly draw parallels throughout this presentation.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, David. And thank you for including me with this esteemed panel. I know we have a lot to say, so I'll try to be quick. And if we could go ahead and start with the first slide. I always like to show everyone where the airport started back in 1955. Not that I want to say we were first, but we were. And then if you could click just for a point of reference, that's where the Las Vegas sign is. And let's go ahead to the next slide. And this is McCarran today. If we click one more time, see where the sign is at, the Welcome to Las Vegas sign. And you can see that the entire city has grown up around the airport. So what that has done to us is truly landlocked us, and we could wait on those slides for a moment. And and that therefore gives us limited capacity. And that's what we have been dealing with, is the limited capacity. You can see, of course, number one, the railroad to the south, and the strip, to the west. Every place that you go, you see very little fallow land left, and that is what gives us the reason that we need a second commercial airport, which we'll get into in a moment. But we know that we're landlocked, we have limited airspace, but now we have limited surface capability too. So we are really at that point where the second commercial airport is getting woven in very prominently in all of our plans. But just to move on, we're not making this stuff up. I think, I don't know if everyone, whoever was here in 2015 when the stadium, the NFL type stadium was first proposed over there in what we call Trop 42, the UNLV land, which happens to be about 500 nautical feet from the end of our runway. So that would have given us immediate capacity impact. It would have taken a runway, actually the two runways, down tremendously, and very, very limited use. So that was a problem, and we're really happy and worked with them to where Allegiant Stadium is located today. Still some concerns with the signage, the Jumbotron, the special events, but they are working with us. In fact, we have an agreement. Our tower, our LAS FAA tower, has an agreement with the stadium people to work with them on the special events. So that shows great collaboration. Moving on with the big oval blue circle you see, I'm sorry, if we could go back to that slide, the blue oval circle or oval thing that you see there is all scheduled for some type of development, high-rise development, all different types of development that butts up against our fence line. So this is the first time that now safety and security concerns come into what's developed around the airport. And with every single thing that happens, it's brought into, the operations, the safety, the efficiencies of an airport. So I can go back years to where in Chicago, when a plane slid off the runway at Midway and ended up in the gas station, FAA gave us additional rules, why we have to protect the ends off our runway. Coming up to, of course, 9/11, a whole bunch of security rules on the airport, on what we call our most secure piece, which is the internal part of the airport airfield movement area. And then 1 October happened. And so now we have to bring in the FEMA and the sheriff's report into development around the airport. And that's what we're dealing with right now. With the developments that are proposed are a lot of security and safety, as well as operations. That's due to everything else that happened. That's where our helicopters actually go right over that blue area. And so development would impact the capacity of the airport as well. So this is all leading to encroachment, which is what we have to deal with when you're an urban airport. And that is what we're dealing with. But the security and safety factors are now coming up, has risen to the top for us to deal with. So moving on to the next slide, please.
So just real quick, it's interesting, and I want to make sure that everyone that's on this remembers that visual, because the encroachment and all the different things that Rosemary is having to deal with at McCarran, she'll have to deal with at Ivanpah as well. And we'll hit that in a little bit.
Thank you. That very important point. So I really appreciate that. But and I'm not going to read this. You can. I think it's pretty clear. The airport, the one and only commercial airport in Southern Nevada, is certainly a gateway to the tourism, to the #1 industry in Southern Nevada, and we're really proud of what we do offer. My most favorite statistic is 1 in 4 jobs in Southern Nevada. I mean, that is amazing when you really think of the airport itself. The airport has about 16,000 badged people in total, but when you think of all the suppliers and just all the different services and everything it takes for those 16,000 functions, it comes out to 250,000 local jobs. So very, very, very important part of it. We welcome in 49% of visitors in total, but very much more important piece is the 70% of conventioneers. Those are our business travelers here, and they arrive by air. So we have to make it, not a place where there's going to be delays, where there's going to be a lot of conflicts, where we're going to have to put so many layers on top of it that it really, at the end of the day, it impacts our capacity. Let's face it, it's capacity and security that you want everyone to feel that it's going to be a simple trip in and out of Vegas. So to that, David, do you want me to go on?
No, I think that's good. I think the most important thing, obviously, is that, the airport, not only the jobs numbers, but obviously it impacts everyone that's trying to get to the airport, getting out, coming into the airport, but it has deep tentacles into the economy of our local community here. And so that's, the 1 in 4 thing, just real deep tentacles as it just continues to reverberate with the impact. So we certainly, we're glad that you're doing what you're doing, and it's great. So, it's kind of interesting. We have 3 panelists here that are kind of coming from very different worlds. Rosemary talked about the airport, which we'll get to dive upon in just a few minutes. Now we have Michael Brown, who is the GoEd director. Michael, you guys recently updated your study. Why don't you just give us a little bit of insight on what you guys came up with in that study?
Well, like I said, we've entered a pandemic for the first time in over 100 years. That produced a public health crisis that triggered an economic crisis that then triggered a fiscal crisis for the state of Nevada. These types of events are a traditional disaster is a 1-day event or a 2-day event. We've had this prolonged period of response, relief, and recovery at the same time. We are still in all 3 modes of this as we roll out the vaccination. It looks like by May 1st, we may be coming out of the response phase. On the relief phase, we've managed to put $60 million of CARE Act into small businesses with another $50 million that Treasurer Zach Cohn and I will deploy shortly. But beginning in July, I told my staff we need to start planning for the recovery phase now. And so we've produced a report on economic recovery and resiliency for the state. And I want to give you just a couple high points, because looking in the rearview mirror, looking back to 2019 will not take us where we need to be. Pandemics change things. We will look back at this period, I believe, like we looked at the oil embargo of the 1970s, and we will refer to a pre and post pandemic economy. Let me go to the next slide here. Nevada is very challenged. Despite 10 years of effort on diversification, we, using an index where 100 is the best, we only rank 67% as a diversified economy. And yet to our east, Utah and Arizona lead the nation with diversified economies. We need a diversified economy because that provides the fiscal stability. So when we hit something like the financial crisis of 2009 and the pandemic of this last year, we have a measure of resiliency that we don't have. Next slide, please. So we look at Southern Nevada. The upper box is where you want to be, where you want your stars. These are the sectors that provide imported capital, provide growth opportunities. And you can see that we have folks in the emerging sector, manufacturing, information technology, logistics, energy, which is what natural resources are. And we have a stellar but mature gaming industry that's a large part of our economy. To bring stability, we need to move those bubbles up above that line into the stars. We're fortunate that unlike many of the Midwestern cities of Cleveland and Buffalo, we have nothing in the transforming sector. But I want you to see Northern Nevada in the next slide. Northern Nevada has successfully diversified its economy over the last decade, largely through logistics, manufacturing, and energy. In fact, it diversified its economy so successfully that it's actually now got a trailing health and medical sector that needs focus because its health and medical sector hasn't caught up with what has transformed in the Northern Nevada economy. If we can do it in the north, we can do it in the south. Let me move to the next slide. We hired SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and the Brookings Mountain West, and John Restrepo to help us work on strategies. This is one page of a 99-page report we're using to plan going forward. But the key to Nevada's diversification and the key to economic resiliency is to expand our manufacturing industries, to expand our world-class zero-based carbon energy opportunities, to work in our health and wellness sectors, and also to become a remote work and playground as the nature of work is going to change. As people using these kinds of technologies, will be changing their travel and work patterns. And so if we go to the next slide. As we also look at Nevada, we look at the opportunities that exist. People talk to me a lot about Dallas and Austin and Texas. And when I talk to folks about why they're going there, the first thing they say to me is central time zone. From there, they can operate across the United States in all time zones at once. We have the advantage, though, that we have incredible reach in Southern Nevada into the Southern California, into Arizona, and we are a Pacific Rim. We have access to the Pacific Rim. And so we need to start to think about Nevada beyond the three states that Senator Laxalt taught me about, and really the three metropolitan clusters that we're a participant in. Now, as my staff has taken all of this theory and all of this research and worked with LVGEA and the Las Vegas Chamber to figure out how to implement it, we have started since the beginning of the year to get calls from major manufacturers that are interested in a Pacific time zone with access to the Pacific Rim, and they're interested in Nevada, but they want to first talk to us about infrastructure. That's a big change. These kinds of companies now are attempting to sort out their logistics chain, sort out their just-in-time inventory that they've become too reliant on, sort out their relationships with UPS and FedEx. And so they want to talk to us about things like railroads and highways and land, where just a year ago, it was about office parks and call centers and things of that nature. The McKinsey consulting firm believes that 2021 is a year of where we will pivot, and over the next 4 years, we are going to see American industry reshuffle itself as it prepares for a new tomorrow. And we are also seeing companies from California that are saying, this isn't just working out for us. We'd like to maybe come across the border, but not very far across the border. And so I've got a portfolio of companies now that are looking at Southern Nevada, they're looking at Northern Nevada, they're looking at Utah, and they're looking at Arizona. But we, as I have learned, do not necessarily have the land we need for these companies. John Restrepo has done a very excellent job of briefing me up on this. And so I've had to prioritize, what can we do to get more industrial and commercial land in Southern Nevada to welcome these kinds of high-tech advanced manufacturing companies here. In closing, I tell you, I've asked Chris Sanchez, the deputy at GOED, to work with Southern Nevada leaders with the blessing of Chair Kirkpatrick and the governor, and we are attempting to untangle some of our infrastructure issues there so we better understand it. I will tell you that Utah is ahead of us, and I don't want to start losing projects to Utah on the basis of infrastructure. And so I'm going around talking to groups about the opportunity that is now before us and how we need to focus in on these core issues of land and infrastructure going forward. And if we do that, then we can successfully diversify the southern part of the state like we did in the north and build the resiliency into our fiscal system. And again, I want to just thank you for your support in this difficult pandemic. It did not go unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Katrina, will you go back to that slide real quick? Because I want to make one quick note. So everyone watching, you see the state of Nevada, and currently, depending on whose numbers, the federal government owns 85 to 87% of the state. And then the other 13 is owned by other owners, municipalities, private individuals, et cetera. So one of the things, thank you for that. We can go to the next thing. I think one of the important things that Director Brown mentioned was he talked about the briefing from John Restrepo. NAIOP did a study, and we've continued to do land studies throughout the years. And one of the things that, I'm not even going to do it justice, this land study, because you can't do it in 10 minutes, you can't do it in 5 minutes. It needs a 30-minute or so presentation so people have time to ask questions and things like that. But as Director Brown talks about this portfolio of companies that want to come here, as soon as they come, they eat up some of that employment land because buildings have to be built, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's important that we understand our future of job growth, our future potential for jobs, and then also our future for the supply of land as employment land. And basically what that, from my personal takeaways from that land study that John was commissioned to do for NAIOP, is that Southern Nevada has a economic disadvantage as we continue to eat up that land for employment, and that land is not replenished. We don't have more to go and to develop. And so this is where Marci comes into play. So Marci, we appreciate you being with us. So what I want to do is I just want to do a rapid fire just around Katrina, will you go ahead and pull up that map real quick? So this is Clark County. And in a second here, we'll do a rapid fire with Marci, just because it's important. The other day I was in my office and, someone said, hey, so the disposal boundary, and then when I go out and talk to people, they're like, hey, so what really is going on in this lands bill? And so I thought, a picture here is worth 1,000 words, and it might be, a few hundred pages of a bill. But let's just first understand who the stakeholders are that you had to work with, Marci, and just some of the acreage that might be involved. So Katrina, will you go up? We'll just hit Moapa. We'll hit Las Vegas in a minute. Let's go to Moapa area first. Will you go ahead, Katrina? Thank you. So, Marci, let's just look at so first of all, I notice here in Moapa that there's tribal lands involved here. Tell us the acreage and the stakeholders there.
Sure, David. So, the county first embarked on this lands bill idea because of one of the things that you highlighted, which is that, the majority of land in Southern Nevada, we're a huge county, one of the biggest counties in the nation, but the majority of that land is administered by federal land management agencies. And so many times in Southern Nevada, there are things that can't be done administratively through those agencies like the Bureau of Land Management. We have to seek a solution through federal legislation because the administrative remedies just don't meet our needs. And so in 2017, Clark County embarked on the development of a set of principles with a large group of stakeholders on what could become of a next lands bill. So hopefully a lot of your members are familiar with the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. And that's a bill that was passed in the late 1990s, 1998. It's been amended 7 or 8 times since then. And it really helps identify where additional land can be disposed of by the Bureau of Land Management and made available for economic development and residential development as well. But those bills have also always been a balanced approach. So not only disposing of additional land in cases where we're running up against land scarcity, but then also doing other things related to designations of federal land that improve and increase the number of conservation acres that are designated here in Southern Nevada. And so in this land bill, one of the things that the Moapa Band of Paiutes had been looking at and working with Senator Reed on for a number of years was expanding their tribal land. So you can see on the map there that yellow color where it says Moapa River Indian Reservation. That's their original reservation. And the black hatch is proposed additions to tribe reservation. Over 40,000 acres would be added to the tribe lands. They have an interest in preserving some cultural areas that are up against that Arrow Canyon wilderness designation there. And then they also are looking for their own future economic development interests. They've done a lot of solar on the existing reservation and are looking to do some additional renewable energy development there. So they were one of the stakeholders we worked with. And actually that's sort of a new stakeholder to the table in this lands bill. And so we were very excited to work with them and to see what could be done in the bill for them as well.
So it's interesting because I didn't, as I started to get into this, I just didn't realize all the stakeholders. So you have the tribe there, the Moapa Valley tribe, and then on this map here you have the red slats going to and then you have one like the Logandale Trail. Why don't you tell us about those two things and the stakeholders?
Sure. So the red hatch are proposed areas of critical environmental concern, or in Cortez Masto's draft discussion bill, you'll see them referred to as special management areas. Those are areas that were identified by the county for additional conservation designation. And there's an economic development tied to those. So when the desert tortoise was listed in the 1990s, from that point on, any habitat in Southern Nevada that was considered habitat for the desert tortoise could not be touched unless we had a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. For those of you who were here in Southern Nevada when that happened, literally everything shut down. Construction workers walked off the job and nothing happened for weeks until we were able to resolve a short-term permitting issue with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So one of the things that we have to do in exchange for that permit is to identify areas of conservation that will offset habitat loss from the development in the Las Vegas Valley. And in the mid 2000s, we realized that there's a number of acres associated with that permit, and we were going to exceed the number of acres in the endangered species permit based on what was available for development. And that was even before considering that we probably didn't have enough available for development to service the types of population increase that we're going to be seeing over the next 30 to 50 years. So we identified these additional areas of critical environmental concern to include in our amended permit with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's done regionally. The county and the local municipalities hold that permit. If we did not do that regionally, if the county and the cities did not hold that permit regionally, every single developer, private property owner, would have to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and negotiate their own permit on a project-by-project basis. So
I got to tell you, Marci, real quick, that would be very problematic.
Yes, it would.
Because we know, yeah. So we appreciate your efforts in getting that. Keep going.
Yeah. So we identified those areas. That's the red hatch. The bright blue that you see on the map are additions to the National Wilderness System. And wilderness has always been a component of any land bill that Nevada has put forward. Senators and congressional representatives from Nevada on both sides of the aisle have always been supportive of additional wilderness. So we wanted to, tip our cap to that and to work with the Nevada Wilderness or Friends of Nevada Wilderness and the National Wilderness Society on additional wilderness designations. So that you see in blue. When this bill gets to DC and gets introduced, having those kinds of stakeholders associated with the environmental groups, both at the local level and at the national level, will be incredibly important. There's a tremendous amount of activism that goes on in DC and at the committees where this bill will be heard. And so, you know, we were happy to work with those interests and as well to make sure that some of what they wanted to see included would be introduced in the bill. Then the Logan, oh, go ahead.
So real quick, so I guess, you know, it's just, so it's super important for all of us to remember that there's the balanced approach here. If, you know, for the habitat, for the other stakeholders, and including the people like us that need land release for employment land. And so that's just super important as it relates to getting a bill passed. All the different stakeholders have a say in this, and it's important to understand that.
Yeah. So, you know, when you see that bright blue designation on the map and you see the red hatch, of course, that can have impacts on recreation users. And so particularly motorized recreation users like off-highway vehicle enthusiasts. And so, you know, they came to the table and they started asking, well, if you're going to take all of this red hatch and blue off the map for recreational purposes, what is there in this bill for us? And so we stood up an advisory committee and worked with them for about a year to identify some areas, and that Logandale Trails on the map there, that's the gray hatch. That's one example of that. There are 3 others on the map where we identified OHV recreation areas to be designated by Congress for the protection of those recreation areas. So, you know, we worked with business and industry, the environmental groups, the tribe, OHV and recreation enthusiasts to put together sort of this balanced approach to a potential lands bill that we could provide to the Nevada delegation for consideration and introduction. And so once we got done with those principles, we passed those off in some draft legislative language to Senator Cortez Masto, who had been interested in sponsoring the bill. She released a discussion draft in last year, 2020, the early 2020, January 2020. And she's been working with those stakeholders to continue to refine that legislative language. And, you know, we feel like we might be on the cusp of having that bill introduced.
Cool. Thank you, Marci. So I just wanted all of you that are viewing, I just want you to look now down at the Las Vegas Valley, and you'll notice that dotted line. That is the disposal boundary for the Las Vegas Valley. Katrina, will you go ahead and go to the next slide real quick? Thank you so much. So that dotted line continues down and around, you know, down the southwest part next to Bird Springs Valley. And all those are ACEC, or areas for environmental concern. But one thing that I want to hone in on is when we talk about a disposal boundary increase or enlarge the disposal boundary, now I want you to look at the South Valley of Las Vegas, where you have the dotted line, and then there is a tan where it says MCCU. That's just one of the places that, and Marci, why don't you go ahead and talk about that area right there as the disposal boundary increase?
Sure. So when we talk about so much of our land being owned by or administered by a federal land management agency, the largest of those is the Bureau of Land Management. And so we had a land configuration here in the Las Vegas Valley for decades where you could have a private parcel sort of across the street from a BLM parcel. And BLM is in the business of multiple use on rural lands. They're not in the business of urban land administration or development. And so that was the primary component of an earlier version of a lands bill, Santini-Burton Act, that identified BLM lands that were in the urban environment, Las Vegas Valley, that could be disposed of, so sold off. And so we've had these several iterations of lands bills, the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, the largest of them. And the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act is the parcels that you see represented here in the dotted line that David was talking about. So everything within that dotted line, if it's owned by BLM, can be disposed of. And there are about just a little less than 30 acres of BLM land parcels available in the Las Vegas Valley for disposal. That sounds like a lot, but as you all know, there are a variety of reasons why those parcels aren't suitable candidates for development. They might not have the right parcel assemblages. There might be issues with what kinds of developers that want to go in and buy and develop those parcels and compatibility with other land uses. And so we really started to see sort of a slowdown of land disposal with the remaining BLM parcels. And so one of the things we looked at was where else do we need to potentially expand the disposal boundary, not only to relieve this scarcity issue, but then also to accommodate the kinds of things that Dr. Brown were talking about in terms of the land in the right places, and in the right sort of assemblages of parcels where we could start to diversify our economy. We were hearing a lot from potential buyers that those parcels just weren't in the right place. They didn't want to have to go all the way into the Las Vegas Valley, especially if you're doing something like freight and warehousing. And so this area that David was speaking to, the one that's marked with the MCCU, is ripe for that sort of expansion of the disposal boundaries. So in all, we are looking at about 32,000 acres of additional disposal, the majority of it here along the east side of the I-15 corridor. And that made a lot of sense in terms of opening up large parcels in the right area for non-residential, primarily non-residential use.
And so that, you know, and even within that 32,000 acres, it's interesting, as you mentioned, there's certain slopes, there's certain size lands, there's certain certain topography that lends itself to industrial logistics centers. And then there's some that are not, you know, including slopes that are going up hills and things like that. So thank you for that. You know, the next thing that I think super important is taking it from the edge of the MCCU down to Prim. Let's switch over to Rosemary real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about the Ivanpah Airport. Now, clearly that was in a lands bill from 2000 and 2002. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and give us an update on the Ivanpah Airport?
Oh, thank you. I'd love to. So yes, I think everything's leading to this airport in my vision. But so this is this actually has 4 congressional acts connected to it, 3 directly, 1 indirectly. The first one, of course, deeming a second commercial airport site. That's the orange box that you see there. That's about 6,500 acres. And then equally important is the hash line around it, which a second congressional act will deem over 17,000 acres around the airport for compatible development. And that is the key, which is why I had to start with McCarran and the encroachment and all the issues that we're dealing with here that are impacting, you know, what we could and what we actually could be here, that we don't want to duplicate here, you know, out there. And something like this, David, I really appreciate you including us because it's just imperative that we work together and we can work together. I mean, this should be a win-win. This airport site in a second commercial airport should be really a layer in everybody's plans with its location, what it can be is up to us right now to be able to deem it. Now, again, it is a second commercial airport. Back in the day, there was, I don't know if it was media, it unfortunately led to a lawsuit that it was a cargo airport. It was never a cargo airport. Just read the Congressional Act. It is absolutely a second commercial airport. Do we have cargo operations? Of course we do. We do at McCarran. Can we there? Of course we will. It's just part of it. There's several ways that cargo can be transported via air. So that is something that absolutely could be in the plan. But
real quick, is cargo going to carry the day though on this airport, or is this passengers is going to carry?
No, that passengers. As you heard earlier, we have a finite number at McCarran, and it's getting a little bit more worrisome of what that number is if this growth and this encroachment keeps on going on. So no, we will be a second airport system, very similar to Chicago or O'Hare and Midway, LaGuardia, and JFK, Dulles, and and Reagan National. So many large metropolitan cities have dual airport systems, and that's what this will be.
Yeah.
We will, our plan is to own and operate it in some fashion.
Yeah.
The opportunities are very open to us right now. When we first had started this back in 2000, public-private partnerships weren't in play for domestic airports. They are now. And again, everything's on the table, but let's talk about the airport a little bit and where we're at on it. So we had suspended the EIS, the environmental impact statement process back in 2012, concentrated on opening up T3, still recovering, starting to see the light of day from the Great Recession. And we did.
Rosemary, real quick, the EIS, what's the significance in that?
Well, we have to have a favorable record of decision to be able to build it. So, it's the whole environmental process.
Okay, cool.
On fallow land and federal requirements. So we did resume that in 2018, and we are, so how complicated they are. So the Department of Aviation has a series of studies to refresh, actually to finish up, and we are well into that process of doing that. We do have the dubious honor of having BLM and FAA as joint lead agencies on it. So that's fun. And Marci's helping us with that. Thank goodness. And we may want to go to the next slide just to show you where we're at. So this is going to be very real. We know that we need it with what's happening at McCarran or the land around McCarran. And this slide, I'm not going to go through each one of it, but this shows where we're at. So we are just about done with planning and moving on to the bullet points in the environmental.
So you're really at the end of, let's call it years 1 through 4, and
right.
Once you get your record of decision, then you're heading into design.
Right. So once we get the record of decision, the favorable record of decision, what's really important is that 17,000 acres is deemed over to us. So we don't have to purchase it. The Act allows it to be transferred to Clark County Department of Aviation. So what that does is starts that process of really being able to plan out that land in a compatible fashion. And that's our key to going forward. That is certainly a key for a public-private partnership possibility for us to be able to, ensue, if that's possible. Groups like this, working with the state is, all comes into play that it could be just a phenomenal win-win. You need air transport for all these other ideas, the ideas that Northern Nevada has that Michael showed us. An airport's key for it. And now we get to plan that. I mean, it's so exciting at where we're at with it. So,
so let me jump in real quick. The compatible use scenario is super important. And I'm going to jump over to Michael here in a second. The compatible use is in the middle of the night. We can't have residents calling and saying, hey, shut the planes off. And so that's why the 17,000 acres is so important for industrial or commercial uses that are 8 to 5. That is a super important thing. Now, Michael, and then we'll jump back to Rosemary after Michael. Your portfolio companies, right, that you talked about earlier, are they going to go to the 17,000 acres? I mean, what type of industries that are compatible use are going to go there in the 17,000 acres that Rosemary's talking about?
We have companies, we have data center companies talking to us. We have advanced manufacturing companies talking to us, light manufacturing companies. It's about logistics for these companies. It's about, the question is, could some of them be infill? And the reality is that many of them are leaving jurisdictions where, just like Rosemary's in the situation where her airport's been encroached upon, they're already in the city of industry or the city of commerce, and they've been encroached upon. And so they're looking to spread out. And they have a perception, because when they visit Las Vegas for a convention, that there's a lot of land here available to them. And we have to kind of walk them through that.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Rosemary, and then we'll jump over to Marci here in just a second. Is that 17,000 acres, is that going to be deed restricted? Is that happen through the county or the feds? How does that work?
Well, again, it's through a congressional act that it has to be compatible uses. So that's about as strong as you can get with it. So what does compatible uses mean? I mean, very simply, very, overall, of course, no residentials, no schools, no hospitals, those are the biggie that don't really go along with noise of an airport. So really, we're looking at it as a 23,000 site project. Because it has to be one master site, and it all compatible with the central need, which is air transport. And so we can start moving on the 17,000 acres probably a little bit sooner. But if we have a master plan, if we have especially a Southern Nevada plan, how great is that going to be? So we're really excited to be a piece of that master site. I mean, to us, we're 23,000 acres in everything else that you're doing. And with what Marci's doing and opening up the 30,000 some acres.
So and real quick again, Rosemary, on the utility side of things, if I'm, let's say Henson Strickland Development Company goes out there, and are the utilities going to be there, or do I need to bring them in myself?
Well, that's to be determined. We do have a congressional act for a utility corridor. That is something that we have to work with everyone on, and actually we have been. So we have meetings with the county. Well, the county's always in it, but with the utilities, with their plans, what our needs are, what other needs may be, and move that forward. So that's really a timing question. There's not a definitive answer.
Sure. Okay, so Marci, with the MCCU land that we talked south of on that little map, my question for you is, Rosemary mentioned public-private partnership and also disposal, potential sale. How is that the land that is potentially going to be released? How's that going to be dealt with?
Yeah, so in terms of the master plan and zoning process, so once the bill is passed, then that will really provide an impetus for Clark County Department of Comprehensive Planning to take a look at the South County Land Use Plan and look at the underlying master planning for that area. And then from that flows creating zoning districts. The county's intent is that area be prioritized for non-residential uses. We've been very clear with all of the stakeholders involved that that's got to really be the primary priority for the lands used in that area. And so, I think that for what's in the county's jurisdiction, that will be the priority of the zoning districts that come out of that. And so that will happen after the bill is passed. And, those are public processes that comprehensive planning undertakes. And so if folks are interested in that, be on the lookout after the bill passes for those sorts of updates to happen.
Okay. And NAIOP's involved with Transform Clark County as you guys are trying to at least master plan that in some sort of fashion. So we appreciate that. And then, okay, so Michael, here we go. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. Okay. So you have this portfolio of companies and they want land, all right? As it relates to Arizona and Salt Lake, what are some of the things that would inhibit them, or it would be more attractive going there versus here because we're opening up this land? We should be all running in. What are your thoughts there?
Well, first off, we have a very talented partnership with LVGEA. And so they're working with those companies that are knocking on our doors right now and seeing what's possible. I'm trying to get folks to look much more forward thinking. Economic development doesn't happen overnight. Economic diversification takes time. Utah achieved its success because of decisions that it started in the 1980s. And public lands bills only come around every decade or so. And so it's important that we constructively engage. And so I'm just trying to present these facts so that we can start this much more forward looking. In the short term, I have great confidence in LVGEA and the mayors that we're working with to help us get through these companies that are knocking on the door. But I do know there's a different world ahead. I'll also say, as a 25, 30-year-old Washingtonian who had an office on Capitol Hill, our congressional delegation, this is a major lift for them. And we need to support them, and we need to be positive, and they have to balance many interests with a public lands bill. And so we need to be as supportive with facts and support for our congressional delegation as we can.
Sure, thank you. So back to you, Marci. So if Michael now brings one of these big companies and says, hey, in that new released land, I need like 500 acres. What is the process of Michael now, or his client, going and taking down this land?
So it'll be subject to the joint nomination process of the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. And that's an agreement between the local municipalities and the Bureau of Land Management on how land will be disposed of within that disposal boundary. And so typically somebody who's interested will go to the jurisdiction of record. So for instance, Clark County, and they would go to our Department of Comprehensive Planning and ask for those lands to be considered for nomination for disposal. The county then does an internal process where we route it to, everybody and their brother on what would need to be potentially withheld from sale for infrastructure needs. So do we need it for a school site? Do we need it for a park site? Do we need it for trails? Whatever the case may be, once that internal evaluation's done and say that area is suitable, then comprehensive planning would take that item to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners would determine whether or not they would support nomination for disposal by BLM. If it's
real quick, so it gets whittled down for utilities, and then it goes through everyone and their brother, and now you get to the Board of County Commissioners, who could potentially decline it.
That's correct. They could, yes.
Or approve it. Okay,
yes.
keep going.
Okay, yep. So if you assume that the board approves it, then it goes back to the BLM, and BLM does a very involved and lengthy real estate process in order to get it ready for a competitive sale. So they auction it off. That's required under the law. And so this is really interesting because, and it's unfortunately, one of the disadvantages to the way SNPLM is organized. The advantage is it's a competitive sale. The proceeds of that money come back to the special account, come back to Nevada. 5% of that money goes to fund state education fund, 10% goes to water infrastructure, 85% goes to several categories of funding, including parks, trails, and natural areas that the county and the municipalities get to use to build parks. But the downside of that competitive process is the original developer who came in and asked for it to be nominated for their project is not guaranteed of getting that property unless they're willing to, keep upping the ante in the auction if that's what it takes. Yeah.
So a lot of time, and that's, and obviously, last month we heard, at the virtual breakfast here that, that's one of the challenges is that when these things go to the highest bidder, Michael's client may not be the highest bidder. And so we just always have to be mindful of that. And, so when and even in the Valley, one of the tricky things is if you drive out of Buffalo, Buffalo in the 215, and you're looking down at all this vacant land, and they're saying, Marci, why in the world should we release more land? But the challenge is those commercial developers, they're getting outbid through this process. And, anytime there's a $30 per square foot land value, you can count all the commercial developers out. That's the challenge that we always have to be aware of. And that's part of the the economic development struggle as well. And so, but anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, I think you summarized it perfectly, David. It's one of the challenges with the way that SNPLMA is structured. We have had lots of discussions here internally at Clark County among commissioners like Commissioner Naft and Commissioner Jones, who find themselves in this sort of situation where it looks like there's a lot of land available, but there's a lot of factors that don't go favorably towards non-residential development. And so we've talked a lot. I've talked to Director Amundsen for the Clark County Department of Comprehensive Planning, who's listening in on this call, and she's monitoring everything I'm saying. Hi, Nancy. About how do we reinforce, if you will, the non-residential zoning, and how do we protect that? What else can we do? And I think that's incumbent upon all of us at the local jurisdictions, that if we're going to be partners with GOED and with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, that we have to do what we can to protect the zoning of those parcels, so that when a developer goes in and they've got their paddle to put up what their bid is, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be flipped and that their numbers are going to pencil out based on that flip. So and you and I talked about that, David, so we're working on that.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate that, because anytime if it's restricted, and it's different if I'm bidding against some other industrial guy, other industrial developer, and it goes within reason. But the challenge is, for our economic development side of things, is that as soon as it's introduced with other uses, like potential, a home builder can pay a lot more than I can. And so, that's where it got tricky, when we were able to switch the land use, and then all the commercial guys were outbid. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as we talked to Rosemary, it's going to be important that, it's not necessarily deed restricted, but it's, there's not going to be any conforming change or anything like that. And including, airplanes coming over the top. That's pretty important. So just in the last few minutes, let's just hit real quick on some of the dynamics that are at play. Rosemary, when I was talking to you early on, you'd mentioned we got to get the ACEC, which is Area of Critical Environmental Concern, taken care of out there in Ivanpah. What did you mean? And that will, you and Marci can kind of banter back and forth on that. What did you mean by that? Because that's an important part of this.
Well, and that's what Marci's been working so hard on, within, one of the many elements. To me, that's the hardest one she's working on. But, that would prohibit development. I mean, let's face it, period. It would not allow, an airport would not allow the 17,000 acres around it to be developed in any manner, let alone compatible. So, that would be a stopping block, which would then absolutely put a finite capacity in Southern Nevada, which nobody wants. So that's why she's working so hard. Thank you very much.
For sure.
Marci,
what are you, and help us all understand, just so we kind of understand some of the dynamics of that bill as it relates to that ACEC you're working on down between essentially Henderson and the end of the state line.
Yeah, so in the mid 2000s, when renewable energy was really taking off and being championed by the Obama administration, there was just a huge rush to have the Bureau of Land Management approve solar projects. And the location and siting of those kind of got out of hand, and it happened down in Ivanpah. And so, the county, obviously, as we've shown, had lands identified for this supplemental airport for many, many years preceding any discussion about solar renewable energy. And yet the BLM was under such tremendous pressure that they were just sort of plopping down these solar fields anywhere they could in Ivanpah. And then on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, when you're going to have those kinds of impacts in endangered species habitat, you have to offset them somewhere else. And so then the BLM, on top of deciding they were going to pepper Ivanpah with solar projects, they also identified an area of critical environmental concern on the east side of the 15. And it would be hugely impactful. They identified this ACEC, And, there's limited amounts of development and disturbance that can happen in those ACECs. And that ACEC is dead smack in the middle of where critical infrastructure to support the airport has to be built. And so one of the things that we identified in this bill was to take another look at that ACEC. It is important. It was identified for desert tortoise connectivity so that tortoises from Nevada could meet up with tortoises in California. That is important to a lot of folks.
State stuff is important.
Yes.
Got
And
it.
so, but there's a way to do that that is not so impactful to the airport, that we can maintain tortoise connectivity and reduce the impacts to the airport. And so in this bill, we asked for the ACEC that was identified in the mid 2000s, the Ivanpah ACEC, to be removed and replaced, repeal and replace with a new, better designation for ACEC down there that doesn't have so much impact on the airport.
Okay, cool. No, that is super helpful to understand. Let's just, and we'll kind of wrap it up, and then we'll ask Mariana for a question. Marci, so all of this effort, there's municipalities, there's Jean down there, there's Prim down there, down by Ivanpah. Are there other municipalities that may have claim on all the things that this lands bill is providing?
Yes, definitely. So, Mesquite has some provisions in the bill related to their interests with regard to water development. There's not much in the bill in terms of land disposal for City of Las Vegas. City of Las Vegas is truly bumping up against being landlocked by federal agency designation.
Okay.
Not as much for North Las Vegas, but a lot for Clark County and for Henderson. And so, Henderson has been at the table on this area along Ivanpah I-15 corridor, and their current city boundary matches up with the expanded disposal boundary. So we've been working with Henderson really closely, the county has, and we've had some negotiations about an interlocal agreement that could kind of set some ground rules for how development is going to occur and the types of land uses that would be allowed, not only to protect the future airport, but then also to protect these non-residential uses that everyone has agreed are so important for the diversification of our economy. And so the county and the city of Henderson need to work closely together to make sure that we're protecting that airport and protecting these non-residential uses.
Okay, cool. So a rapid fire question for you, Rosemary. In your mind, when do you think, how long do you think the airport until it's up and operational time frame?
We're looking at the 2035 timeframe.
Okay.
For it to be operational.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to now turn it over to Mariana. We're just going to probably go 3 to 5 minutes over, if that's okay. If Mariana, why don't you give us a question, and then we'll kind of work through that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. It's been really great listening in this morning. We've received quite a few great questions, and we won't be able to get to them all today in the time frame that we have, but I'll be sure those of you who reached out, we will provide feedback and some follow-up. So at a high level, what I'd like to ask, and maybe this is more directed for Michael Brown here that we have on the call today. Our membership is comprised of a variety of industry disciplines and diverse skill sets. The overview of this lands bill, as David alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, may be the first time many of our members, certainly myself included, have had a crash course in the lands bill. A big question that has come in is, how does the passing of the lands bill directly impact the folks on this webinar today? A lot of it sounds like it's related to economic security and jobs. In the absence of the federal lands bill legislation, what would that mean for the future of Southern Nevada?
Your NAIOP Southern Nevada has produced an excellent report that John Restrepo prepared. And as I recall from that report, it identifies that with just current trends, there's a land gap. And I stand to be corrected by that, but there's already a land gap that's forming up with the ability to develop with kind of what current economic projections are, let alone a reshuffling of the American economy and the opportunities it might create here in Nevada. And I would refer to John's report.
So Mariana, I let everyone go long because I wanted to make sure and get all the information and get the questions, but I'm going to take the liberty we'll get back to people on the questions. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, especially our distinguished, panelists here. So I'm going to just cut this off, but I want to thank you, Marci, and I want to thank you, Rosemary, and I want to thank you, Michael, so much for this education, because I think it's so important, not only as members of NAIOP, but for the whole community and all the stakeholders that have a claim on this great Southern Nevada. So again, let me close this off. I just want to thank again our Helix Electric and all the participants in the breakfast this morning. And please take a moment to take the survey, and our next breakfast will be March 18th. And you guys, thank you again. It was an absolute blast. We appreciate your participation in NAIOP. Everyone be safe and be well and have a great day.